And when the US made this justification for compete and collaborate, what they were saying that we need to talk to China on climate change, we need to talk to China on public health, we need to talk to China on terrorism.
Yes.
What Trump is now saying, or the conservatives are saying, is that we don't need to talk to anybody on climate change. And very clearly, this drill is one of the mantras of this Trump campaign.
Right.
Basically, it means that we will
exploit.
If climate change has to be dealt with, we leave it to the ingenuity of human beings to find solutions to it.
You're on StratNewsGlobal. I'm Nitin Gokhale. In today's gist, I have with me Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, India's former ambassador to Russia, well-known strategic thinker, and of course now the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. And the topic of discussion that we have today is the upcoming American elections and its effect not just on India but also on the world. But primarily, how should India look at a possible Donald Trump presidency in the US, which we'll know in another 10 days for sure, whether he is going to be the next president or Kamala Harris would be the next president of the United States. But we thought we'll indulge in a speculation or also talk about a document that has been put out by the Heritage Foundation called Project 2025, and on which Ambassador Raghavan has written an extensive piece in the Vivekananda International Foundation website, which I found very interesting, and I thought I'll get him over to talk about this. So thank you very much for your time in your busy trip to Delhi, which you make occasionally. But let me start with this question. We are a week away from the American election, and looks like a possible Trump presidency. We don't know. Of course, elections can never be predicted fully. But if that happens, what do you think will be the Trump president's or administration policy towards India, and how should India look at it?
Well, first of all, thanks, Nitin. Thanks for having me over. It's great to be with you again.
Thank you.
And you opened up a very fascinating subject.
Because you've written one piece which is very fascinating.
Yeah, but if you were to watch the American election campaign unfold,
right,
you would never believe that there was actually a very coherent agenda of one political party which exists out there.
Right.
Of course, the strange part of it is that the leader of that political party himself denies all knowledge of it.
Sure.
But anyway, let's put that aside.
Yes.
I'll come to that as well. But what you're talking about, which is called Project 2025 in short, its full title is Mandate for Leadership, a Conservative Promise. It is an effort by the conservative movement in the US, as they call it, to regain control of government.
Right.
So, I would really recommend this particular document. It's there on the internet. There's a reference to it. It should be read by every student of international relations, every student of US politics. Why? Because it actually puts down in one place how the federal government in the US functions. What are the federal structures? What are the various, from right down to every single department within the President's Executive Office to every other department in the federal structure, what the department does, how is it manned, how does it interact with the other federal elements of the federal structure. Then it goes on to say what is wrong with what is happening now and how it should be corrected.
Fascinating.
So to anyone who wants to understand how American politics works or it doesn't work, I mean, or in the view, or doesn't work in the view of one particular political stream,
Right.
I think it is well worth.
And it's huge.
reading.
It's mammoth.
It's 922 pages.
No,
or
that's
something
of course
like
the document, but the government itself is.
Our government is huge, yes. So it does take this much to, especially when you go into the most minute details as to what the policy was and what the policy should be, in addition to the structure of the government itself. So the other thing you learn when you actually read this is how much Donald Trump has been caricaturized. Caricaturized and demonized. Because when you read this document and try to compare it to what he did in his first term, there were many elements where you find that what he was trying to do in the first term does match with what has been written here. For various reasons, he didn't do it. I mean, that's another story in itself. But also remember that this document is written by people who have held top positions in his own government in the first Trump administration or with other Republican administrations.
Right.
So this is a conservative movement's document.
Right.
And by the way, you said Heritage Foundation. Actually, more than 50 conservative think tanks got together to do this.
Yeah, they led the project.
They led the project. They coordinated the
Correct.
project. But you have, people like Peter Navarro, for example, who has written the chapter on trade.
Trade, yeah.
Very close Trump confidant. In fact, he was in jail for having, I think, ignored a subpoena or something like that. He was released from jail and drove straight to the Republican National Convention to make a speech in Trump's presence.
Exactly.
So, there are people like that who have written this, and therefore you can be reasonably sure that this is what accords with Trump's thinking.
Right.
And all the demonization of Trump does not take into account the fact that there is a document that exists which is his agenda for governance.
Certainly.
Now, all this long preamble, you talk about what does it mean from India.
But before you come to that, I just want to say this, that Trump was demonized and caricatured because the popular media and the social media has been hijacked in his view and others' views, and which is not a incorrect thing, by the left and the ultra left, is what the conservatives think, and that's why he sort of, they don't want him to come back. That's another theory that is going on in the American elections, right?
Well, yes, the American media is really virtually controlled by the liberal media.
Absolutely.
I don't call them left or ultra left or anything like that, but the liberal media really has. Yes, this is one thing. But also what the conservative movement feels is that they have captured every element, every string of government.
That's right.
And it's not only the media, but every other institution, governmental and non-governmental.
Right.
So there is actually a hint of desperation that runs through this document, saying that, look, this is our last chance to recover conservative values.
Exactly.
And in doing so, they are obviously stepping on entrenched ideas. They are stepping on vested interests.
Right.
All of which I think leads to the visceral nature of the campaign that you can see, the polarization.
And you're right that everyone interested in it must read it, but let's come back to the India agenda, or the effect on India. What would it have?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 elements that we need to keep in mind as far as India is concerned. I will make a general statement, as I've made in this analysis that I've done on the basis of what they have said, that in the last 20 years, India has done much better with Republican governments than with Democratic governments.
Absolutely.
Look, I must clarify immediately, I'm not in government.
Yeah.
The point of view I'm making is not a government point of view, it's my personal.
Your analysis, yeah.
But this is what is true. But I have worked with Republican governments. I was in the Prime Minister's office when we worked with the Republican administration of George W. Bush. And I have also had the opportunity to work with Democratic administrations in different capacities.
Sure.
What is the difference? Well, one of the things that you hopefully will not face is what you're facing today with the United States. What I call a forked tongue approach.
True.
So you have a whole series of people criticizing you on various things that you do within your country. In areas where the US record, incidentally, is not necessarily much better than yours. While at the same time, you have a number of areas where our cooperation is proceeding extremely well. The US is our most important strategic partner, there's no doubt about it.
Right.
And there are convergences, there's no doubt about it. But there are also these irritants that keep coming up in various ways. And there's some sanctimony, the sanctimonious lecturing that you get. By and large, Republican administrations do not really indulge in that.
They don't pontificate.
Yes, so that is one thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I see in this report, in this particular report, what they say, they talk about India as a very important partner. Of course, so does the present US administration say that. They say it is very important as in the context of China. Again, it is something that right from the Bush administration onwards, if there is one wellspring of the India-US relationship and strategic partnership, it has been China, the Indo-Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the interests in the Indian Ocean. All of this they say. They also talk about, of course, the other element which is, they say, not necessarily about India, but which will definitely impact on India is trade.
Trade, exactly.
You know, we remember the first Trump administration, this fair trade and free trade. They withdrew the GST from us.
Yes.
You can expect all that and more, but I think it is, in this case, it is equal opportunities. They want to do this to their friends and their adversaries and their partners and their allies, everything uniformly. And there is an economic logic that they put forward to that. If we have time, we can come to that. Yeah. But we should expect that. But I think we should also probably, we are in a better position to handle that now than we were in 2016-20 period.
Right.
The other thing is that, you know, there is a negotiability. Trump administration showed very clearly in its first term that you could, I mean, after all, he's a deal maker.
Sure.
So generally, there is a negotiability. So you can actually negotiate something. So if he says that we're being ripped off, it means that you're giving concessions without receiving anything in return. So if you can find what you can...
Transactional would
be
a good...
So you may be able to trade off a political gain for an economic loss. We should be willing to be a little bit more...
so India also needs to be flexible.
We need to be more flexible in understanding it and taking advantage of that.
Right.
The other aspect of relations with India necessarily will be how the US administrations deal with China.
Okay.
Now, you know, the whole logic of the US saying that India is important because of China, I think the underlying logic of that is that hostility between India and China suits the United States.
Exactly.
Right? Now, to what extent they push that and try to keep us apart is a different issue. But the Trump administration, and the other aspect of it is that while trying to keep India and China apart, the US has a series of engagements with China, which is justified by this, the justification is that, you know, since we have a wide range of interests, there are some areas where we have to compete, some areas where we have to collaborate.
So why not allow India to do that?
Yeah, that is one thing. But if you come back to this Project 2025, it says this policy of competition and collaboration does not work. You need to dump it and you need to do a wholesale strategic decoupling from China.
Which is very clear clearer than anywhere else.
It is very clear. And you know, when the US made this justification for compete and collaborate, what they were saying that we need to talk to China on climate change. We need to talk to China on public health.
Right.
We need to talk to China on terrorism.
Yes.
What Trump is now saying, or the conservatives are saying, is that we don't need to talk to anybody on climate change. And very clearly, this drill baby drill is one of the mantras of this Trump campaign.
Right.
Basically, it means that we will
exploit.
If climate change has to be dealt with, we leave it to the ingenuity of human beings to find solutions to it. Let us not restrain the black gold that we have under our... and you know, that is both an economic as well as a geopolitical thing. That we will drill so that we produce enough to bring down the cost of oil.
Right.
So you Americans who are suffering at the pump or suffering with high construction costs, etc., will pay much less for your mortgages, pay much less for your houses, pay much less at the gas, at the pump, and so on. You will also reduce the income that countries like Russia get from which funds various of their activities.
Sure.
So in that case, in that way you increase your control over the not only the energy trade but over the geopolitics
of it,
of that region.
Right.
So that is one. So there is no reason to compete with China on that.
Correct.
Then public health is the other thing on public health, what these people say is that we will launch an investigation into the origins of the Wuhan virus.
Yes.
And if found that it has escaped from a lab, we will push China for trillions of dollars of damages.
Repairment,
So, on the contrary, there's no competition. I mean, there's no collaboration. We will go against China.
Right.
And other than that, you know, what they've talked about, how they'll deal with China, total strategic decoupling. I'll read a portion of what they've said here. strategically expand tariffs on all Chinese products,
Right.
increasing tariff in such a manner and at a pace that will not expose the US to lack of access to essential products, and do it in a calibrated fashion.
Right.
Provide financial and tax incentives to American companies to onshore production from China to the US.
There you are. It's return. The
So it is not
reverse.
China plus one, you bring
Yeah,
it back,
reverse
right
back,
back into
yeah.
our country. And at some other place, he also says that where you do not onshore it, you re-hemisphere it. In other words, shift it to the central and southern hemisphere, to the central and southern America, I'm sorry,
America, yeah.
the western hemisphere.
Right.
So that we also, I mean, this is a kind of an economic Monroe Doctrine, so that we sort of renew them, we have control over them.
Absolutely.
So those who are talking about, for example, trying to get Chinese investment into XYZ place to circumvent the ban on China, I think if this is implemented, they'll have another thing coming.
True.
Ban all Chinese social media apps, that of course we are also doing. Prohibit Chinese companies from bidding for US government contracts. Eliminate and reduce dependence on all Chinese supply chains. And then compel the closure of Confucius Institutes. You withdraw accreditation to any American university that might receive money from China.
Which is absolutely
Which is
good.
huge.
Yeah, very huge. Because that's where all the pro-China policies get done, is what they think.
And reduce or completely stop visas to Chinese researchers and students coming into the US. And that's about 300,000 Chinese coming into.
Correct. And which will mean a lot of effect on the economy. I mean, the economy linked to the university.
Yes.
Education.
So it is a complete root and branch attack. A lot of people have said that this is not sustainable because they said you increase tariffs, you increase. Now, they have an very complex economic plan, which I'm not an economist, so I can't. But one thing they say is that, if you open up the drilling, you bring back industries, the associated industries to
Downstream,
America.
industries will come.
You
there,
will
yeah.
create jobs for people whom globalization has ignored.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they're the Trump.
the
Trump
Rust
voters.
Belt and otherwise. Yeah.
Then the blue collar workers, non-college blue collar workers who are Trump's electors.
Yeah.
So you actually reinvigorate the economy by that. You also then by further onshoring, hemisphering, and so on, you basically the cost which the tariffs will cost increase which the tariffs will impose.
Right.
You will reduce by reducing the price of oil.
Right.
You will also reduce by a process of industrialization that increases the. Now, how you calibrate it, how you synchronize it, how well you do it, I don't know.
Correct.
But what the Trump people are saying is that, look, during our first term, inflation was under 2%. So what are you telling me about?
Right, exactly. No, he toms that. I mean,
and the other thing, they say the average household worth of households at the bottom 50% of in income terms went up by 120% during the first Trump administration.
Correct.
In all of the Biden administration, it only went up by some 20%. They have figures. So, they have, economists have their own justification for this. So, you're talking about a sea change in the way a country deals with China.
Right.
And they are China's biggest trade partner.
And the irony is that if this happens and it's a Republican administration, it is a complete reversal of what Nixon and Kissinger did 50 years ago or more than 50 years ago.
Look, it is a reversal of the entire Republican economic
logic.
Yeah,
exactly.
And they have already started now what they were actually criticizing us for industrial policy in the 1960s and 70s and 80s.
Right.
Is what they reverted back into. So the Washington consensus becoming the new Washington consensus, or what? See, a lot of things that the Biden administration has taken are also things which actually they have learnt from the Trump election victory and from the Trump administration.
True.
Including, of course, even China policy.
Correct.
So we will be impacted in many ways by this. Economically, we need to prepare for it.
Right.
And if Chinese products are cut off from the US, they will try to come into India.
Correct. They'll look for the Indian market. Yeah.
So once again, our anti-dumping policies have to be very very,
All calibrated.
well constructed. Because today you have this whole problem of people telling you that you need those, you need investment and you need imports in order to not impede the growth of your economy.
Or the manufacturing sector.
Yeah, but at the same time, you also need to have the policies that will encourage growth of industry in this country, so that 10 years later you are somewhere, 5 years later, 10 years later, depending on where it is. So it is a very much stronger calibration you have to do now under those circumstances than you are being called upon to do today.
Right.
Let me put it that
So
way.
that's a major challenge India is going to face, if these policies are implemented.
Yeah, and I must tell you what they say about Pakistan.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yes.
They say we should be clear-headed about Pakistan. We should not let short-term counter-terrorism considerations to overlook the fact that they need to change their entire outlook, and therefore we need to work for them to change their outlook, which severs their link with terrorist groups.
Which is again a very pragmatic and a practical approach.
Which is an approach that we should welcome, obviously.
Yeah, of course we should.
So there are things like that. They talk about, of course, there is the other aspect which will impact on India as well. They talk about how essentially when Trump has been very often projected as someone who will sort of throw Ukraine under the bus,
Right.
who will cozy up to Russia, who will cozy up to dictators. But there is actually a logic that runs through this. Essentially, this is that Eurasian security or European security architecture should be done by the Europeans. So Russia, Europe and Eurasia should get together and create a security architecture and call upon the US only to provide a nuclear umbrella if there is any such required. So NATO becomes a conventional deterrent force vis-a-vis
And not be
Russia.
dependent on America.
So
like it is
conventional
currently.
deterrent, it should be dependent on itself.
Right.
America will produce the
Nuclear umbrella.
nuclear umbrella. So, it's something that we've been saying for a long time, that if you do not get a European security architecture in place, you're going to continue to have things like the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing he says that NATO should also now become an Arctic country, not only a Euro-Atlantic force, but an Arctic force. Now, you see, there are 8 Arctic countries and 7 of them are NATO countries now.
Exactly.
So it should refocus on.
Yes, Arctic also. Yeah.
So essentially, it should refocus on things that are of American immediate interest. Similarly, in the Middle East and West Asia,
Right.
he talks about getting together the countries, the Gulf countries, Israel, Egypt, and potentially India. Potentially India as another quad,
Right.
which will defend the security interests of the region. And he says, all these countries have an interest in traffic, in commercial traffic through the Red Sea and through this area.
The Indian Ocean. And
So it makes sense.
Yeah.
There is one issue there, though, Iran.
I was just going to come to that how are they going to deal with Iran?
And that is going to be the test of their West Asia policy, because they say that no concessions to Iran, deal with them, cut off all
Like they
cooperation
want to
with
do
them,
with China.
but also work overtly and covertly to support the aspirations of the citizens of Iran.
Okay.
So that is regime change.
Regime change, which they have done earlier. Yeah.
Well, which they have tried to do earlier. So Iran, the policy is very clear. Regime change,
Right.
with the Palestinian cause is dismissed in one sentence. Defund the Palestinian Authority.
Correct. Yeah.
So
they're very clear.
So, how does it go? If you can change regime in Iran, and get it into a pro-Western regime, then you've got something going.
Yeah.
If you can somehow deal with the millions of Palestinians who are there, so it's not easy.
Not easy,
So there is this element of their West Asian policy or Middle East policy, as they call it, is a big question mark, and they'll come up against reality. Actually, one must have this caveat that while they've said all this about what they would like to do, it will also come up against what resistance of various kinds. So you'll have to keep adjusting and
True. But I think the administration which comes in, if it comes in, and it's increasingly likely, it looks like, but let's see. The other challenge that India would have is its relationship with Russia. how would a Trump administration, possible Trump administration, look at Russia as opposed to China?
Okay, through this document, the thought that runs through is that America should focus on its principal strategic adversary, China. Anything that you do there, in where they discuss a solution to the Ukrainian war, while admitting that there are sharp divisions within the Republican movement on the Ukraine war, that you've seen.
Yes.
You've seen their statements around as well. They say ultimately we have to find a solution that does not put, of course, that does not put US boots on the ground, that is in the US interest in terms, is fiscally responsible, and keeps in mind the fact that our principal strategic adversary is
It's
China.
China and not Russia.
In other words, don't get diverted into subsidiary strategic challenges when you have a principal challenge.
Right.
So this is when they talk about this Eurasian security architecture,
They
and
talk about Russia
even
there.
about the Arctic, they say that Russia has huge interest in the Arctic. They acknowledge that. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that this whole piece of real estate Russia is sitting on.
Exactly.
So they talk about keeping Russia's ambitions in the Arctic to realistic levels. Number one. Number two, getting Russia's cooperation in keeping China out of the Arctic.
There you go.
This is because this is again.
So it's a very, very subtle.
So there are nuances in this.
Yeah,
Basically, that you realize that you need to do business with Russia. You realize you need to have a deterrence, and the other part of it is that you say that even within Europe, when we build up this thing, we must build up stronger alliances with Eastern European, Central European countries, because they are more. I mean, in short, they are more anti-Russia. So
because of their own history.
Because of their own history. So this deterrence also will be done.
Right.
And by the way, Trump started it. In fact, Trump withdrew forces from Germany, put more forces in Poland, went to Poland and promoted their initiative for the Three Seas initiative.
Right.
There are things that, again, as I said, shades in what Trump was trying to do in his first administration,
which
are now elaborated here. So one would imagine that, and by the way, Jeff Smith, who has actually of the Heritage Foundation, who has contributed to this and who has been quoted in this. He says very clearly that we should remember what our goals with India are, and that should include not getting diverted into differences like their relations with Russia.
Correct. He's been saying this, that Katsa, when they tried to do this,
he said this actually in one of my interactions with him.
I'm sure, So he's come to our studios also, and he's been very clear about this. He's been his focus has been on China as the principal adversary for United States. I think Heritage Foundation itself also, has that view that China is the principal adversary, and
don't get diverted into side issues.
Don't sort of divide your attention into all this.
So this is a recognition also that US is an overstretched superpower.
True.
It has to outsource.
Now prioritize.
As much outsource security to others, just keeping an overview on this.
Sure.
So that US resources are not taxed too much. So there is a very thread of logic running through it. Of course, it has to, when it faces the real world, how it deals with it is a different issue.
They'll have to calibrate it.
And if they can actually do the personnel, because the last Trump administration, the problem was the personnel.
Yeah. There was nobody to implement it, or very few people.
If they can actually get the kind of people they want to implement it, if Trump, with his own, at least what we see in public, somewhat mercurial character, whether that character will adjust to a formal agenda, then you're looking at a change in the world.
So final question. India obviously is watching, the world is watching what's going to happen next week or the week after. If this happens, then we are in for very interesting times, and it's not going to be black and white, straightforward, that you are with us or against us. It's going to be multiple levels we'll have to adjust to the American administration, looking at the challenges. Sometimes they will be with you, sometimes they will not be with you, all that. Are we geared to do that?
I think we are geared to do that. We have shown it in recent times. And the way we do it is to keep our lines open to countries which meet our interests in specific areas.
Right.
And I think focusing on our economic interests, political interests, military interests, to the exclusion of being diverted by others, by pressures from others.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if we receive fewer lectures on what strategic autonomy is, it may be good.
Right.
You know, you have Macron
Yeah.
saying that we are being reduced to a vassal of the United States
Correct.
and that we need strategic autonomy. So,
Exactly.
strategic autonomy is not a dirty word.
No.
Strategic
It's
autonomy
a practical aspect.
and it is not anti-American. I think
True.
in our country it has just become equated with anti-Americanism. It is nothing of the sort.
It's a very simplistic conclusion, I think
Yes,
people have drawn.
but unfortunately it is so widespread.
Right. That's true.
So I think we are well geared to do this, and what we have shown it in our recent behavior as well.
Correct.
And we should be well positioned to continue in this way.
I'm glad you say that, because we'll see. The proof of the pudding, of course, is in the eating.
Of course.
Next week we'll see what happens. But thanks very much for this very interesting insights, which normally these topics don't get discussed. But I was very fascinated by your paper and, of course, the original document which you have pointed us all to, and which, like you said, everyone must read.
Every student of international relations should read it.
Must read. So we will keep recommending that. So thanks for watching. Thanks for your time, and
Thank you.
thanks for watching, viewers. These are the kind of interesting discussions we keep bringing to you. So do subscribe, do follow us on our social media handles, and of course let us know what do you think of such content. For the time being, it's goodbye.